Now, to continue, I would like to introduce you to the second partner in the successful healthcare collaboration. Ms. Maureen Bisognano is the CEO and President of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. Ms. Bisognano is a prominent authority on improving healthcare systems, and she advises healthcare leaders around the world, is a frequent speaker at major healthcare conferences on quality improvement, and is a tireless advocate for change. She also serves as instructor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and is a research associate in the Brigham and Women's Hospital Division of Social Medicine and Health Inequalities. I hope I pronounced everything correctly. We are delighted that she is here today to share her latest thoughts and vision on the important topic of caring. Ladies and gentlemen, please provide a warm welcome to Maureen Bisognano.
Salam alaikum. Good morning to you all, and welcome to the third Middle East Forum. I'm delighted to be here with you. And I picked this topic about caring for a number of reasons, but a lot of it is what Dr. Hanan was alluding to this morning, that we're in a time of great change, and that sometimes provides energy, and it sometimes can be a challenge. And so I wanted to bring us back to why we all came into healthcare in the first place, and to think about caring. Now, caring means gratitude to me, so I begin by looking back over the last several years and celebrating some of the amazing accomplishments that you've heard about here this morning. We still have a long journey to go, but when you look back and you see some of the amazing accomplishments that have been happening here at HMC and more broadly in the region, I think we've got a lot to look back on with pride, that we're making progress towards some of the big challenges that Dr. Hanan was talking about. The opening of the Hamad Healthcare Quality Institute is a particular joy for me because it's a demonstration of having like-minded, like-valued partners here in the region. So we can extend the journey, we can accelerate the journey and make this improvement go even more quickly. But it is a time of great change. We do have this problem of an aging population and this expansion of chronic diseases. Even as the population here grows, looking at some of the challenges to the healthcare system, expansion of technology, and taking a look at the amount of research and how quickly it's coming out. And as I'm traveling around the world and talking with doctors and nurses, healthcare professionals, and patients, what they're telling me is that sometimes the pace of change is frightening. When I began to do a little research on that, look at this, change is happening now 10 times faster and at 300 times the scale than it was 100 years ago. So we're in a world of constant accelerated change. And that, in healthcare, it's even faster. So I was talking to my son about the pace of change, and we were talking about how much has changed so quickly. And we were laughing because I was looking with him at my old desk and thinking about what used to be on my old desk. I had a telephone, and I had a Rebel camera, and I had calculators and adding machines and a fax machine. I had a printer. I had a typewriter, and then if I wanted to look something up, I'd have to go to the encyclopedia. And now, my desk looks like this. So my son can't even believe that I didn't have a cell phone and Siri to call to answer questions right away, that I couldn't Google anything I wanted. And when I started to look back at the pace of change, it reminded me that sometimes change is wonderful and exciting, and sometimes it can be crushing. And so I wanted to talk to you about caring, because as I've traveled and I'm talking to people working in healthcare, I'm finding that often when change happens really quickly, they find themselves trapped in what Jim Collins calls the tyranny of the or. They find themselves, when they're faced with the pace of change that we all confront every single day, they find themselves saying, it's me or you, it's medicine or administration, It's long-term or short-term. It's cost or quality. And we get stuck in this tyranny. And I think it's really a bad place for us to stay. We can't care if we're stuck in the tyranny of the or. So what I want to do today is to talk about how we move from the tyranny of the or to the genius of the and. How do we live in a world that's going so quickly, and yet we need to turn and care? How do we end up running down the corridor, but then stopping to care? Dr. Hanan and I were talking about that last beautiful moment of that video that was shown, when the woman is celebrating the discharge of that patient back home to his family, and then immediately turns with compassion to accept the new patient in. That's the genius of the or. What she was able to do is to live in a world of celebration and compassion at the very same moment. And that's what I want to talk about here this morning, is how do we thrive in this new environment? So I looked back at this wonderful quote from Francis Peabody, who said, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." And what I want to talk about this morning is that we've got care in the hospital system. We've got the care of patients who are sick. But as Dr. Hanan said, as healthcare professionals, we've got to move our thinking to and caring to keep people well. And the only way, I think, that we'll get best care for people when they're sick and best care to keep people well is also to take care of ourselves. So it's this three-part journey. How do we take care of ourselves so that we can help people stay well and take very good care of them when they're sick? I want to start with this piece, when people are sick. Now, we still have a long way to go, I think, in improving care. Tremendous accomplishments here and around the world, but we still have problems in the healthcare system for the sick. We still have delays and safety problems. So we've got to work on these. And I was so inspired by listening to Mark talk yesterday about the changes at Ferrari and the changes at the whole Formula One racing system. And I want to repeat that amazing figure that he talked about yesterday, 1.92. Do you remember that? 1.92 was the number of seconds it took to do that pit crew after the innovation. That's what we're after in healthcare. So this last year in the United States, we launched a new leadership alliance, and we're going to go global with it this year. It's got 4 pieces to it. The first part is to talk about measurement. How do we get measurement right so that it's not a burden and that it's very informative? The second part is thinking about leadership and joy in work. How do we really invigorate all of us in this room so that we can reach out and care with compassion when that's needed? The third part is a collective voice. It's let's all of us in healthcare come together and transform the system ourselves. Let's not wait for government or regulation. Let's step up and say, we're the professionals. We will transform healthcare in a collective voice. And then finally, we're looking at radical redesign. We're looking at how do we get to 1.92. And so we've created a set of radical redesign principles, and I just picked out a couple to talk about this morning. I'm hoping that you'll take this list back with you, and that when you start to go back to work and you're thinking about the problems of flow, of safety, of getting patients in the right place, of reliability and efficiency, that you'll pull out this list and start to look at radical redesign principles. I was so moved by that guy that stood in front of the race car and said, I can't go any faster than 6 seconds and then 3 seconds. But when they used a radical redesign principle, they got to 1.92. So that's what we're about here. And I picked out a couple. I wanted to talk about 3 this morning. The first one is thinking about collaboration and cooperation. You've heard already a lot this morning about teamwork and collaboration. That's our theme here for the forum. So what does that look like? 2 examples for you. The first one is from Saskatoon in Canada. There was a hospital up there that was experiencing problems in flow. they never knew on any given day whether the flow was going to be even or challenging. So a team got together, they collaborated and they cooperated, and they came up with a new way to predict flow problems. They looked at it this way. They created a new metric. They call it ADR, admission-discharge ratio. And what they found is when they huddle in the morning, that everybody had different knowledge. Some people were looking at the surgical schedule, and they knew on a given day that there were more cases booked than others. Some people were looking at the flu, the burden of flu in the community. Some people were looking at weather patterns. Some people were looking at staffing and vacations. Everybody had different knowledge. But when they got around the table and they started to look at it, they could create what they call the ADR. They could look at, on a given day in the coming week, with the number of admissions higher than the number of discharges. In that case, they put like a little cloudiness over the sun. In some cases, there were more discharges than admissions. They have a sunny day. But what they did was use this way to get everybody in the hospital to understand all of what that team knew. And in using the data, they were able then to predict. This is knowledge that in many cases goes to waste. In many cases, it's a big surprise every day whether or not the burden of the census is going to take its toll on the staff, and in other cases, when the day is going to flow more easily. But using all of the knowledge, collaborating and cooperating in daily huddles allowed them to do really accurate prediction. And with the prediction came improvements in flow. Now, I can't tell you how many times since I've been here, people have come up and said, "We're sorry about the heat," or "We hope you enjoy the heat." And I do want to tell you that I do enjoy the heat, and that's because this was my winter. In Boston, we had the coldest and snowiest winter in history. We had almost 2 months when it never got up to freezing, and we had 140 inches of snow. So it was a wild, wild winter. And I bring you this slide to tell you the example of 3 different hospitals in Boston. One of the hospitals has normally 110 admissions and discharges every single day. They don't have an ADR. They haven't calculated an ADR ratio, but 110 admissions and discharges every day. Now, when the snow hit, often people could not go home. They couldn't be discharged. On a couple of days this winter, the governor of our state said no travel can happen other than through professional transportation. So at this hospital that normally has 110 admissions and discharges, the number of discharges dropped to 10, and the number of admissions was still about 50 or 60. So you can imagine what the ADR ratio looked like in this hospital. Within a few days, patients were lining the corridors, staff were required to work overtime, everybody was crying, and the philosophy of this hospital was kind of, oh no, we didn't see it coming, and now we're trying to manage as best we can. But you can imagine that safety and compassion were at risk here when there were patients all throughout the hallways and staff who had been stuck working for days and days and days. A second hospital, just a few miles down the street, took a very different approach. What they did was they looked at weather predictions, and they said, we see that weather's going to be a problem. We predict that a lot of patients won't be able to be discharged. Therefore, we're going to cancel elective admissions for the coming week, and we're going to manage flow. Now, those patients who had their cases canceled, in many cases, they couldn't have made it to the hospital anyway, but they were rescheduled as soon as they could be. But during the period of the snowstorms, everything was fine because they had a balance between admissions and discharges that allowed the hospital to function pretty smoothly. A third hospital, again, a few miles down the road, did something more like the 1.92. What they did was every morning predict admissions and discharges, and they said we could get these patients home if we had adequate transportation. So what they did was they went out and rented a lot of utility vehicles, Jeeps and other vehicles that were safe in the snow. And they hired off-duty ambulance drivers and firefighters, and they said to any patient, if you want to go home, we will get you there safely. We'll stop off at the supermarket, these guys will shovel your walkway, and we will get you safely back with your family. That hospital had no disruptions in flow. That was 1.92. What they did was say, we're going to use all the data, all the knowledge we've got in the system to collaborate and cooperate to produce the best, most humane and compassionate and safest care for patients. So I tell you this to say that I think as leaders, we have a different job to do, and it's about prediction. We can't let the burden of uncertainty weigh on the safety of our patients, and we can't let it weigh on the lives and the vitality of our staff. So I would suggest that when you go back to work and you're sitting in your management meetings, your huddles, or however you meet on a daily or a weekly basis, that you think about a new agenda for change. I would say this should be your agenda. The first issue is innovation. Do you have places where you need to get to 1.92? In that case, you're going to need to innovate. You're going to need to harvest or go outside or build a new model. But the current system, as stressed as it is, won't provide the best care. So as leaders, sit around, collaborate, cooperate, and say, where do we need innovation? The second item on your agenda can be spread. Of the hospitals that Dr. Hanan put up on the board, who's best at what? And how do you send a team over to spread best practices? Because as leaders, I believe we've got great performance some places, but we haven't deliberately spread it to every place. So that's our job, spread. And when you're in your huddle, look at the variations in performance and figure out how do we achieve the best performance for every patient. And then the third item on your agenda will be exnovation. Now that might be a new concept for you. It's a new concept for many in healthcare, but it's critical. Exnovation means stopping all of the stupid, wasteful things that we've been doing forever. And in healthcare, we don't exnovate. We add and add and add and add until the staff are so stressed that they don't have time. When I was the CEO of a hospital, I said to my management team, why are you not improving more quickly? And they said, we can't, we're too busy. So I said, okay, we're going to exnovate. What are you too busy doing? And the first thing they said is meetings. So the next week, I held a little class for all the managers on how to run an effective meeting. And then that day, I said, from this day forward, every meeting is cut in half. You can meet half as often or half as long. And for some managers, that freed up 20 hours in their week. So we exnovated unnecessary meetings. And I can tell you, the meetings were just as productive as they always were. It didn't matter a bit that they were half as long as they were effective meetings. And then I said, let's look at reports. Let's look at all of the things that you're doing that aren't adding value to your staff or to your patients. And we exnovated until they had enough time to then devote their passion and their commitment to improvement. So think on your agenda about exnovation. It's perhaps a new way to think, but it's a way that I think is so important for us if we're going to free up people to care. The second radical redesign principle I wanted to talk about is moving knowledge, not people. And the example I bring here is from Dr. Sanjeev Arora. He's a physician who specializes in hepatitis C in New Mexico in the United States. And he founded a project called Project ECHO, Move Knowledge, Not People. So here is a global health problem, hepatitis C. It's a worldwide problem. In the United States and New Mexico, there were lots of people who had hepatitis C. The good news is it's curable. The bad news is the treatment is very burdensome for the patients. There are lots of complications. And getting primary care doctors to be able to treat this is very challenging. So what Dr. Arora found is that he often had waiting lists for months. He was the specialist in the state. And so he would have waiting lists for months. Patients would be waiting weeks or months. And then they often would have to drive 200 or 300 miles to get to his office visit, meet with him for 20 minutes or a half an hour, and then drive 200 or 300 miles home to their care team who didn't know how to take care of hepatitis. So Dr. Arora thought, why am I moving all these people to come see me with extraordinary delays? Why don't I move my knowledge out instead of my patients in? So this is how Dr. Arora practices medicine now. Every day he comes into work and he sits with very inexpensive video technology equipment, and he collaborates with primary care practices around the state and around the United States. So each one of these practices will come into a room and they'll present a patient case. And through his use of patient cases and video technology, he's providing education for the primary care people who are then taking care of patients at home. He's eliminating the need for them to be transported. Look at these figures. It's so exciting to me. The clinicians, the primary care doctors, are saying before they had limited knowledge of how to take care of patients with hepatitis C. Now their knowledge is doubled or more. Look at the clinician benefits. They're saying we are competent. And I can tell you that as their competence in managing these patients is increased, their joy in work is increased because they know these patients and their families. Sending them 300 miles for a visit and then getting back a patient care plan that's unintelligible to them wasn't increasing their joy in work. But now they're leading the patient and family care teams and they're finding joy in work in their knowledge. And look at the treatment outcomes. So the UNMH, the University of New Mexico Hospital, is the academic medical center. They always prided themselves on getting the very best clinical outcomes. But now Project ECHO is getting better clinical outcomes than the academic medical center. So what we're seeing is when you move knowledge, not people, that what you've created is a democratization of medical knowledge. And it's happening at about half the cost. So what happened was then Dr. Arora said, well, if I can do this with hepatitis, maybe I can get other specialists in. So now he's managing patients with depression, patients who are at high risks for maternal or infant mortality. He's beginning to use his equipment, and every day when you walk into his center at the University of New Mexico, you can see Dr. Arora taking care of thousands of patients around the country and around the world. Better clinical outcomes at much, much lower cost with joy in work. So I'm partnering with Dr. Arora. This month, we're launching a new project in primary health clinics around the United States. These clinics take care of some of the poorest patients in the United States, and they often backlogs in flow. So we're partnering to create improvements in flow in all of these primary care clinics and to teach all of these people in the clinics how to do improvement. Sanjeev calls it Project IHI. Can we get improvement skills built in a very efficient and effective way, not only across the United States, but around the world? So this is, I think, a wonderful example of moving knowledge, not people, to manage everything that Dr. Hanan was saying. Better health, better care at a much lower cost. These are the kind of radical redesign principles that I think we need to see. The next radical redesign principle is changing the balance of power. Now, we've come from a very traditional system where the power typically resided in the professions, and it was not often that we found patients having comfortable communication with their providers. So we're looking now to change the balance of the power and to begin to work, as Victor Montori was saying yesterday, much more in balance with our patients and our families. 3 different ideas. One is access to medical records and knowledge. What do we know not only about the clinical side, but about the circumstances in which this patient lives? Second is about self-care. How do we get patients to care for themselves as much as they can? And third, as you've heard me say, is balancing, moving the shift from what's the matter medicine to what matters to you. Here are a couple of examples. This is a picture of a young mother who I met in Malawi. And I was in a waiting room in Malawi, and I started to talk to this woman through a translator. And she was telling me about coming to the clinic and getting care and how much she relied on the community health workers for her care for her family. And at the end of the conversation, I said to her, "What's that blue book that you're holding?" And she said, "Oh, that's my family's medical record." And so I said to her, "Doesn't the clinic keep the record? Don't the medical records belong to the hospital or the doctor?" And she said, "No, it's my family's medical record." And so I said, "So does every member of your family have their own blue book?" And she looked at me like, "No, this is my family's medical record." And all of a sudden, I woke up to think, why do we separate a person by body parts and have different pieces of their record fragmented all over the system? And when she started to talk to me about this, I said, wow, this is where we need to head. So I started to think about how do we spread this. And you can see now an example from Ireland where patients are keeping their own medical records. And these are beautiful records. They're keeping records, the whole family's in one record. They're keeping everything from vaccination dates to allergies to sutures and everything that's happened to the family. And it's an amazing thing to see the change in conversation when somebody walks in with the family's medical record, just like the women from Malawi. And now in the United States, we're starting to see similar things with experiments happening around the country with a project called Open Notes. Dr. Tom Delbanco started this in Boston, and it's now spreading across the country. And it's where patients and physicians share the same medical record information. In the beginning, there was a lot of fear, and certain patients could be included and certain others not. But what we're finding from the research on satisfaction with Open Notes and clinical outcomes with Open Notes is patients will never go back. They never want to have their records closed off. And that in the beginning, physicians were a bit reluctant, but well over 90% of them now say that they will never go back either. And the most recent experiments are even opening notes for patients with mental illness, and they're finding wonderful clinical findings when everybody is sharing the same information. So that's one example of a spread from one country to another using the radical redesign concept about changing the balance of power. The other one, and I introduced Christian to this conference last year. Christian Farman is a young man in Sweden who, when he came down with glomerulonephritis, began asking his nurse if he could do his own dialysis. And now this, since I spoke to you here last year, has spread to England and is now spreading to the United States, where patients are beginning to take care of themselves in ways that we didn't anticipate before. When I met Christian, I asked him, where did you get the courage to tell the nurse you wanted to do your own dialysis? And he said, I wanted to live a full life. And then he began to teach the lady in the next bed. But Christian's lessons for me, when I first met him, were this. He said, I wanted to live a full life. And I said to him, what matters to you, Christian? And what he said to me back then was, I want to work. And as you might recall, once Christian started doing his own treatments, then the head nurse set up a unit, a whole unit with the executives in the hospital, where all the patients who want to come in and do their own dialysis. And look at these patients, compare them with patients on dialysis in your own hospital. These patients are exercising while they're dialyzing. So their functionality is dramatically improved. So I said to Christian, did you go back to being a mechanic at Saab? And he said no, and I thought it was a failure. And he said, no, I am now a registered nurse. I was in the hospital all the time. I became interested in healthcare. So I'm a registered nurse. I'm the head nurse on the ENT unit. So I said to him the next time I met him, Christian, what matters to you? And he said, I want to get married. And he said, I never had the courage to dream about this when I was really sick. But now I want to get married. And when I looked at the figures, this is the triple aim. Christian's got a dream of getting married. Christians got a healthy life, and the costs are half. Complications are way down. So this is the triple aim for patients on dialysis. When I was with Christian last year in Sweden, I said, Christian, what matters to you? And he said, I want to have a baby. So I got to meet Wilmer 2 weeks ago. This is his little baby. And he is living such a happy life that he never would have, I believe, if he had been continuously cared for by the healthcare system. If he had been dialyzed in a medical way, I don't think he ever would have found the courage to take on his own dialysis, to find his own health, and to find the well-being, the whole sense of himself to get married and have Wilmer. And Wilmer is just the most amazing little kid. So I think the idea, the radical redesign idea of changing the balance of power, it might feel foreign to some people, but it is so necessary for us to get to the triple aim. And then I want to share with you how it all comes together. So I have a little video that I'm going to show you. It's the follow-up to a Cleveland Clinic video that I showed 2 years ago. But I think it talks very clearly about this idea, a radical redesign idea, about how do we think about caring. So if we could show the video.
I had heard what no woman ever wants to hear: you have breast cancer. And I remember sitting up and go, what did you just say? And she said, yeah, you have breast cancer, it's confirmed. I walked out of the breast center and I stood in the lobby going, oh my God, what the hell just happened?
I had a very uncommon occurrence. When your pancreas explodes, as mine did, it felt like somebody cut me wide open and put a red-hot frying pan in my abdomen. And that happened over minutes. I went from living my life to about sick as a human being can be. Over the 4 months of hospitalization, I had 20 operations or major procedures. My wife literally camped out at my bedside every day because we didn't know if that was going to be the last day.
I had to have a CT of the abdomen. That's where they found out I had a mass on my kidney. I'm like, oh my God. Just to hear the word cancer can blow anyone away.
I was driving home. I didn't feel right. My car drove off the median, dropped about 30, 35 feet. I had a seizure, broke my back, sternum, ankle. A lot of things were broken.
I spent about 3.5 weeks unconscious and really had almost none of my major organs working. And yet I was hearing many conversations quite sharply. My family had 2 discussions about end-of-life care. I had the thought how interesting it was that I was watching myself die.
When I initially was diagnosed, how it was presented to me could have been maybe a softer touch. I mean, she scared me. I mean, it's scary stuff to begin with, but she knew I was alone. All I was worried about was living. I wanted to dance at my daughter's wedding. I wanted to hold my grandchildren.
Having that fear, not knowing what the outcome was going to be.
I was being sustained only by tube feeds. I was unable to eat. It was very difficult to do almost anything. So to be reduced to somebody who's essentially dependent on others for almost every facet of your activities of daily living is really difficult.
It's sort of a helpless feeling, especially when you're immobile. That's even more helpless because you really rely on them for everything. So having that one-on-one communication, because really you're waiting there and you're laying in that bed all day and all you want is 5 or 10 minutes. That's it.
So during my ICU stay, I lost 50 pounds. Every time that the nurses and others came to turn me, to change the sheets, clean me up, it felt as if my hips and my shoulders were coming out of joint. when you have completely lost your ability to care for yourself, you find yourself vulnerable and with limited dignity left.
Be kind to the person in passing, walking a little slower than you. You don't really know what they're going through.
A lot of people tell me, oh, I know how it feels. You know what? Until you become a patient, no, you do not. Those feelings are entirely different. Yes, they are.
I could tell within seconds of a caregiver entering my room of whether they were in the moment and actually caring about me. It's a sense that you know if they're there to help.
Whether it's from holding their hand or patting them on the back. All those things end up being very important. Sicker you are, probably more important they are.
When I feel like I'm at the end of my rope sometimes during a busy day, then I try to put myself back in that bed. And then when I see somebody who might be angry or who might be frustrated, I remind myself what that feels like to be there. And then it makes sense.
So I don't want you to need to get sick in order to learn how to care. But I will say this, that as busy as we all are, the one thing I would ask you to think about is when you see someone walking slowly or with fear in their eyes, don't walk by. When we get so busy sometimes and change is happening so quickly, the tendency is to get into ourselves and to just run down the hallway. But I'm asking you to don't walk by, to stop, because this is the kind of caring for people when they're sick that we so desperately need. So caring for people when they're sick, we need to think about that word, caring. And we need to think about new designs so that we can get to the point of compassion and clinical excellence, where we can use evidence-based medicine and the human touch and compassion. And so I offer you some of these radical redesign principles because we're going to need a lot of change to get to 1.92. I want to now talk for a minute about caring to keep people well. And as Dr. Hanan said this morning, this is our new obligation in the Triple Aim. We've been getting better and better at caring for the sick, but we now have to prevent people from getting sick. So I bring you a story from Scotland to tell you an example of how we need to collaborate with people out in the community, as she said, with others outside of healthcare in order to make health better. This is a story about a school filled with kids who needed help from the healthcare system, but they weren't getting it. The improvement issue, the provocation, was this gentleman here in the picture is an 81-year-old man who is a very wealthy guy. He owns a castle. He's very esteemed in the community of Stirling in Scotland. And yet every day he goes to volunteer in this school, primary school, and he teaches the kids poetry and he teaches them music. And one day when he was sitting there, he provoked the teacher by saying, "These kids are fat." He said, "I'm looking around the class and the kids are all fat." Now, the teacher had learned quality improvement through our early years project. So she said, I wonder if I can run a PDSA test. So she said, I think I'll figure, can I do a PDSA test by getting a few of the kids to go outside and exercise with me? And Derek Feely had to translate this, but the Scottish way to say it was they couldn't run the length of themselves. These little kids couldn't run at all without getting short of breath. They weren't fit. So the school teacher began to think about ways that she could run PDSA cycles in order to get these kids fit. And eventually she figured out that if she got the kids to run around the school 5 times, that they were running a mile. And she said, I want to think, can I run a PDSA to see how many kids I can get to run a mile in the school? She said it's easy to do for them, maybe not so easy for you. You might need a different exercise. In Boston, I might need a different exercise. But the idea is that she figured this out, and then she started to run PDSA cycles and get the kids to run. What she found is that it didn't require any education. The kids didn't need to change clothes. They could do it every day. It only took 15 minutes, and it was free. So she ran PDSA cycles in her class and then spread it throughout the whole school. She set up a measurement system so that each kid devised their own measurement system. Like this little girl has 5 blocks, and every time she runs around the school once, she adds a block so that she's tracking her daily mile. The impact was it included all children in the school. It improved their focus. The parents were saying that the kids now had better concentration, they were sleeping better, they were eating better. The kids started parent clubs, so now the parents start walking. The teacher said that the kids had better ability to focus in school. And after 3 years' time, there's not one kid in that school who's overweight. There's not one child who isn't fit. And that came from one teacher saying, I can use Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles to test a way to increase exercise, which increased everything else in these children's lives. They've got balance, they've got stability in relationships that they didn't have before. The parents are delighted and the parents are more fit. And you can see that using quality improvement tools, first in the 1 grade and then for the whole school, to create a health impact that I don't think any of us in healthcare could have made. So this is an example of how I think in us caring for health, we need to reach out and start to think in a very different way about who our partners are. If we look at pediatricians or we look at school nurses, I don't think any of them with normal health interventions could have made the kind of impact and guaranteed that not one child in that school was overweight. So last fall, we launched a project in the United States, and again, we're spreading it globally, called 100 Million Healthier Lives. And this project is reaching way outside the walls of healthcare. We've got 24 test communities in the United States, and every one of the test communities looks different. In some cases, they're working with veterans. In some cases, they're working with children. In some cases, they're working to keep the elderly vital at home. But in every case, the community has seen a vulnerable population, and they've assembled all of the people within the community who might help, all of the people in the community who can bring the same energy that that elderly Earl brought to the classroom when he said, these children are fat. And I think this 100 million healthier lives is the way that we care for health. We're caring for people when they're sick, but we need to move way upstream and start to think about how do we prevent illness. It, again, is a big step toward the triple aim, because we're starting to think here about how do we prevent illness, which is very costly, and it takes away not only from the healthcare system, but from the lives of the people that we serve. So, caring for the sick, keeping people well, and I want to wrap up by talking about caring for you. We're seeing the stress of all of the change, the pace of change that we've been talking about, have a huge impact on us as caregivers. And yet I'm asking you to be compassionate, and I'm asking you to think upstream. So I do want to wrap up this morning by helping you to think about you. Joy in work is a very strong word, but it's one I really believe in. It's a part of my life's work. And this is how I define it. Joy comes from gratitude. It comes from people having relationships that acknowledge the amazing contributions that people bring. It's about having hope that we can make the system better, that we can get to 1.92 seconds, that we have an awareness of abundance, that we understand the school can help to make kids better just as much as the healthcare system can, and that we get that deep satisfaction from serving others. If you come to visit IHI, when you come into the office, the first thing you see is our mission. And this is it. We will improve the lives of patients, the health of communities, and the joy of the healthcare workforce. Because I don't believe we can care for others if we don't care for ourselves. And when you leave IHI every day, there's a little bin by the elevator. And when you leave, you have the choice of either picking a blue bead out of the little bin with the smile. That represents you had a day of progress, or you had a day of joy, and you put the blue bead in the tin. If you had a day of setbacks, if you had a day that brought you no joy, then you put a brown bead from the frown in the bin. And we're counting these every day to look at joy in work at IHI. We're running plan, do, study, act cycles on ourselves to say, how can we make things better? How can we really focus on joy in the workforce? Because a lack of engagement, we know, impacts patients. If we are not engaged, what happens is more mistakes get made, there's less adherence to physician advice, we're not credible with patients. There's less sympathy, and we've been talking all morning about caring, and less patient satisfaction. So if we truly are going to get to the triple aim, we've got to take care of ourselves. Now, this is something that I see frequently, though, is that when you're in bed, you can't get to sleep because you're thinking about work. And when you're at work, you're so tired, all you can think about is going to sleep. Familiar, huh? Okay, I'm going to give you a test. Here's the test. In the past week, stick up your hands. How many of you have skipped a meal? I hear groaning. Ate a poorly balanced meal. Worked an entire shift without breaks. Ate your lunch at your desk. Changed your personal plans because of work. Okay. Arrived home late from work. Drank too much coffee. That'd be me. Slept less than 5 hours a night. That'd be me. Oh, yeah. I have a lot of company here. In America, we have over 40% of Americans are regularly sleeping less than 5 hours a night. And that means we're twice as likely to die of heart disease and almost twice as likely to die of all causes. I love that this study was done by a guy named Cappuccino. So if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to take care of other people. At Health Partners, one of our partners in the Leadership Alliance, they're really focused on taking care of their staff. Every staff member takes a health risk appraisal, and they think about themselves as whole people. They think about their career. Where do they want to go? They think about nutrition. They think about work-life balance and stress. And the whole of the hospital system here is focused very much on taking care of their employees so that their employees can take better care of patients. And to watch the results of this focus on employee health and well-being have been dramatic. What we're seeing is real improvements, not only in the health and the productivity of the workforce, their own joy, but then their ability to work the hours that they need to take care of the patients who need them. So I would say we've got a couple of things to work on. Work on our own health and work on our own minds. Now, I know all of you know what IQ is, intelligence quotient, and many of you are joining the healthcare field because you wanted to explore your IQ. You wanted to use your IQ. You also may have joined healthcare because of your EQ, your emotional quotient, that you want to care for people, that you have empathy, and that you want that part of you to be rewarded because you're a smart and caring person. But I want to push you today on your CQ. That's your curiosity quotient. Because curiosity quotient is that ability to not walk by, but to stop and ask a question. It's to say, these kids are fat, what can we do about it? It's to say, our employees are tired, is there something we can fix? It's to say that we can make things better and get to 1.92 seconds. So I think you will find more joy if you actually open yourself up on your CQ. A lot of people are afraid to. They're afraid because they're so tired now that they think that being curious will actually create more fatigue, but I guarantee you, try it, it won't. So as I wrap up this morning, I want you to think about you. I want you to think about these. Find joy in your work. To think about how do you not walk by, because it's so important that we be curious, that we understand the patients and the needs that they've got, that we don't walk by a fellow worker who's in trouble and who might need us to reach out, that you work on your own health. And most importantly, I would say, innovate, and to do that well, you need to exnovate. So we've got a great couple of days here, and I'm hoping this will be your agenda, that together you'll begin to plan your own PDSA cycles on your own health, that you'll be curious and you'll learn, that you won't walk by somebody who's got something to teach you, and that you go home with not only ideas and inspirations for innovation, but a really strong, firm list for exnovation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for that. It was very nice to see that people are talking about the importance of caring. You know, it's very important. Let's give one more round of applause to Ms. Maureen. So a couple of thoughts that came to my mind when I was listening to the presentation is that when I was a little boy, the most important thing when I was sick wasn't the medicine. It was my mother sitting next to my bed and showing me how much she loves me and she cares about me. And now that I am 31 years old, the most important thing is to have my mother sitting right next to me and showing me how much she loves me and cares about me. And I think that when you're in a hospital and you don't have your mother or your father or your wife, whoever your dear is, that's where the healthcare professional comes in and gives you that little bit of an extra love, that little feeling, you know, that you can feel like, yes, I can get better and I will do better. And to share just one really short story, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, I would consider him actually my brother, was diagnosed with cancer. And this happened around 2 years ago. And the first doctor, believe it or not, that spoke to him, had simply told him, you're not going to make it. That's it. He said to him, there's no point in trying anything, so you might as well just, you know, start writing your will. And he gave me a call. I'll never forget this because I felt a fire, a rage in my heart. Nobody should really be telling people to just give up. Whether you're going to make it, you're not going to make it, you need to feel that there's hope. You need to feel that positive energy. And I really do believe that it is that positive energy, is that feeling of love that is around you that makes you persevere and can actually heal you as well. So, we're reaching the end of the day. Actually, we're really on time, so this is fantastic. We are on time. Before we finish, just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you are on Twitter or if you are on any social media and you're doing your usual stuff, you can always send a tweet to @HMC_Qatar, and the hashtag is HamedQuality. And if you would like to tweet to me or send me a post or anything, you know, on Instagram or on Twitter, my @ is @ILoveQatar. Do love Qatar. And and of course, you know, a couple of people did send me some messages on the side. They asked if they could take some selfies with me as well. Absolutely. I think I get more excited to take selfies with you guys than you guys get excited to take selfies with me. So absolutely, I'll be on stage. Finally, you're now welcome to join us for refreshments in Exhibition Hall number 1, where you're invited to visit our interesting and engaging mix of exhibitors. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'm going to see you at the end of the day as well. Thank you very much.